Get educated, be radically empathetic. That was Stephanie Waters. Her sister, Jennifer Warrington, age 50, survived the shooting in Buffalo, where that domestic terrorist came specifically to kill Black people in Buffalo, New York. She was working in the pharmacy at the time that she got the call, Stephanie Waters, that her sister's grocery store was under siege. This was at the sentencing of that Cretin a couple of weeks ago on Valentine's Day. The domestic terrorist who was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing phase, they allowed for family members to speak. And Stephanie Waters said that thing. And she said it. She said it with her full chest. And I appreciate it because we need more people to be educated and to care. So Seena Ghaznavi is here, my co-host for the day. Seena Now, he's the producer of Fraudsters, a podcast that's amazing. Check it out. And joining us is the lecturer in the American Studies Department at the University of Virginia. She's also the author of American Founders: How People of African Descent Established Freedom in the World, in the New World. Let me welcome Christina Proenza-Coles back to the show. Hi.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Listen, your Twitter page is joyful. Your book is amazing. I'm grateful every time people who have a platform use it to inform people. So you're doing the work that must be done. So thank you.
Thank you. Likewise.
Yeah. So I was on I'm on your page every day because I follow you. And you highlighted people that I didn't know. And I consider myself pretty well read, but I also know that there are more things that I don't know than I do. So I'm always happy to be educated. I wanted to start with Dr. Elmer Iams, because as a Black physicist, we were honoring Ed Boucher this month as the first Black man to earn a PhD in this country, period. And he earned it in physics from Yale. His parents were enslaved. They were the property of a man that went to Yale. And they were committed after washing clothes and taking care of people that their son would have that experience. And he did. He got a PhD in physics. So to see this physicist, Dr. Elmer Iams, how did you come across him?
He's maybe more famous than Dr. Iams. He was married to Nella Larsen for a little bit when they lived in Harlem together during the Harlem Renaissance, and they ran in those circles with Langston Hughes and all of the famous people. They didn't last that long. But that's how he came to my attention, because I was reading up on Nella Larsen, who famously, she famously wrote the book Passing, which I think is now has been made into a movie.
A movie. Yeah, it was. It made into a movie starring Tessa Thompson and Ruth Negga. I think I'm saying that correctly. Yes.
So they were briefly married. But Dr. Iams, he was born in Memphis, Tennessee, and his mom had been enslaved, but his dad had been part of a free community since in Philadelphia. You know how in Philadelphia there's like a super long lineage of like a free Black community that goes back to before the founding of the colony practically, and so he went to Oberlin College, and his parents met at Oberlin College. Oberlin folk was so many people come from through Oberlin, part of these stories, but his parents met in Oberlin College, and he ended up getting a PhD. I think he's the second African-American to get a PhD in physics. Although I hate using first and second, because I feel like people go through archives and they realize, oh wait, there was someone earlier. Right. So they keep changing. That keeps changing. But he did have a difficult time as a Black physicist finding work. Yet he completely advanced, and I don't understand it. I don't understand physics, but apparently he just was on the forefront of advancing quantum mechanics and did all of his experiments that was really on the cutting edge of physics. And he taught at Fisk University kind of before and after his marriage to Nella Larsen. But I mean, he was really someone who was moving the needle, I think, in the discipline.
You think about Fisk, you think about W.B. Du Bois, you think about Memphis, Tennessee. Right now, it's Tyree Nichols, but it was Robert Church Sr.'s town.
Yes.
And, the churches built that Beale Street. Robert Church Sr. also helped fund Black Wall Street in Tulsa. And you think about what was happening in these cities. I'm going to need Hollywood to get busy. Like, there's all of these convergent storylines that Church alone is a whole thing. But then you bring in the Iams later on, and you start to see something's going on there, because you don't just become a physics PhD out of nothing. There's a community there, and Fisk at the center of that tells an even deeper story.
Not to mention Mary Church Terrell, the daughter of Robert Church, who goes on to do extraordinary things politically. I mean, you could really see what, once people have like a little bit of opportunity and can take it, it magnifies, right? It goes intergenerational, it's communal, it's really remarkable.
Mm.
Christina,
Tell us about. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just, I find this so interesting. We've talked to other historians and other academics and researchers and stuff. I'd love to know a little bit more about what is your research process? Like, how did you find some of these people? How did it take this long for these folks to be found? And is there like a book that we all could get on Amazon where this is all listed?
Yeah, her book. Get
your book, but like
American Founders. Yeah.
In like the movies late at night in like a weird dusty library, like going through stuff. What's that like?
Well, what I was saying last time I was on the show, I used to teach at Virginia State University, and I taught I was teaching African diaspora history. That was my title, but I also, what they had me teach was U.S. history, world history, Latin American history. And every time I was getting ready for classes, I kept coming across these incredible stories of men and women, Black men and women who had just done incredible things, like started independence movements or started businesses or advanced medicine. And somebody was finally like, we should get this all in one place. And so now it's kind of, it's like a pastime in terms of doing the Twitter every day. And then the Twitter gets and I like the Twitter because we can have conversations and people upload links and we can have, more information about the individuals, but I also preserve it on my Instagram, which, is a more lasting way that you can see all these images and how these folks all connect, but it becomes like a rabbit hole. Like you start to, of who's married to who's what their kid did. And so it just sort of keeps, it keeps sort of unraveling where I just keep, I can't, now I'm years into this and there's 500 people on the Instagram page and I'm learning about new people every single day.
Wow.
Oh, Christina Proenza-Coles, American Founders is the book. Harriet Gibbs Marshall, born in 1868. Tell us about her.
Okay, well, I have to start with her dad.
Okay. Listen, stop. Can you pause for a second? Yeah. I'm doing a pass the baton whole thing that's stretching out until next year. And I have this thought that nobody came first. Right. Like you said, there's always somebody before. Right. And we have to do, if the Bible does the begatting, there's like 2 books in the Bible that just does lineages. We have to honor the people that came before. Unfortunately, with many of the descendants of enslaved folk, that lineage gets broken at some point because you didn't have any agency. Even Frederick Douglass said, my birthday is February 14th, because he didn't know when he was born. So he picked that as his birthday because there was no before. And who was his daddy? Do we know? So it's tough. We have to somehow put the tapestry together. But I'm grateful that you said, let's start with her father. Yes.
Going back in the back is so great. All these different roots. But what a great name, Mifflin Wistar Gibbs. He was born in Philadelphia in 1823. And like I said, Philadelphia really was this, there's lots of free Black communities in, New Haven and Providence and New York City that were remarkable, but Philly was something special. And so he basically follows to head out to the gold rush in San Francisco in the 1850s. Apparently, the rumor had it, he had like 60 cents in his pocket. And he starts a business, he meets people, he meets other African-Americans coming out for the gold rush. He started a business, he started a shoe store, as far as I understand it, that did really well. And then he started 2 newspapers, which, again, not to say the first, but some say they were the first Black newspapers in California in the 1850s. And that's a whole other, Charlotta Bass and her newspaper in the 1890s and the 1910s. She was the first African-American woman to be a vice presidential nominee in the 1850s.
Wait, what?
Sorry.
Wait a minute. Hold up.
Charlotta Bass. She's an unbelievable American hero. Because she was from South Carolina. She had moved to California, took over a newspaper. Because her boss on his deathbed said, can you please take over the newspaper? So she was an African-American woman who ran the newspaper, the California Eagle. And this was more in the early 1900s. And she wrote about I mean, she called out all of the, discrimination in housing, discrimination in policing, discrimination in hiring. She laid it all out in her paper. The Ku Klux Klan sued her for libel and she won. They were stalking her house. I mean, her husband was like, for God's sake. And she was like, I got to do this. She never backed down. And then she ended up, the Progressive Party put her on the ticket for vice presidential candidate. I want to say it was in 1952, I think. And then, it was the Progressive Party. It didn't get a lot of votes, but I mean, she was a formidable force. I mean, she literally brought the case to the Supreme Court that ends up overturning, I guess the restrictive covenants that had to do with redlining. Not that the practice didn't continue, but she would fight for, she heard about Black Californians being thrown out of their homes. And she was like, this is wrong. So she not only wrote about it in the paper, but she would go, stand in front of the courthouse and then literally help bring the suit. I mean, she was incredible, Charlotte. And then, I mean, she's on, and by the way, this isn't just me. Like, so the National Park Service, the U.S. National Park Service has a website dedicated to her. And they say she is an American hero.
Wow.
I was talking today, I'm sorry, about D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation with my class and how the image, it won an Oscar. It is still listed as one of the top 100 films to ever be made. It was screened at the White House by, I think, Woodrow Wilson, the president of the United States. And this woman fought against the images and that film. And that was the lawsuit brought by the Klan, who felt that she was besmirching their character by saying, hey, wait a minute, this is some bull crap.
Exactly right.
By the way, she lived to 89. 1969, she passed away. She was born in 1880. Any Black woman that was born in 1880 that lives 80 plus years is the healthiest. Why we can't? This is crazy. If I live to 89, I'll be impressed. This is insane. Wow, what a boss. I love it.
But wait, can I get back to Mifflin Wistar?
Right.
Yes.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Yes,
sorry.
I'm sorry. This is too exciting. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
This
Christina.
is my problem, though. This is what happens to me. So he started a newspaper in the 1850s. And the reason what's happening, though, in California in the 1850s is they're starting this legislation, this really restrictive legislation. They're hassling his business. They're hassling African Americans. They're trying to prevent them from testifying in court. They're trying to have a poll tax. One source said they were supposed to wear like armbands. I don't know. But anyway, it was California was unwelcoming and was passing a spate of legislation in the 1850s. So Mr. Gibbs and several other of his colleagues lead an exodus of some like 700 African-American families to go to British Columbia, to go to Vancouver Island, to say, like, we're not putting up with this in California. We're going to start again on this frontier. And Mr. Gibbs becomes a naturalized citizen. He gets elected to the city council. He helps develop a mine and a railroad. He's a very good businessman and entrepreneur also. He helps to set up a militia in British Columbia. And then, as you see in a lot of these stories, like now I'm thinking of Martin Delaney, but like people who, reject the U.S. when they're being impossible. But then after the Civil War, he does come back to the U.S. He does get his law degree. He becomes appointed a judge, and he ultimately becomes a diplomat and appointed to serve as the ambassador to Madagascar. So, it's like reminds me of Martin Delaney, who you guys might know, like he was rejected he was accepted to Harvard Medical School, and then thrown out with 2 other Black students because some of the white students, wouldn't put up with it. Other white students said, don't be ridiculous, but the administration finally threw Delaney out. And so he was very, Black nationalist, we should leave, the country. But then during the Civil War, he was an officer and he served bravely. And he gave back. So, once the Civil War happened, he, gave back to his community, stayed in the US. It's complicated. But anyway, so Mr. Gibbs, though, when he's in British Columbia, he has 2 daughters, and he and his wife had both gone to Oberlin, and his daughters ended up going to Oberlin. And his one daughter, the first that you asked about, is Harriet, and she's an incredible musician, incredible pianist, incredible voice. And she ends up founding a musical conservatory in Washington, D.C. and around 1905, something like that, maybe a little bit earlier. And what I think is so cool about it, it's one of the most best, female-run businesses in the country at that point, regardless of race. I mean, it was a really incredible business that persevered, I think, until 1960. She ends up marrying and going with her husband, who was kind of a diplomat, to Haiti for a little while. So she eventually did write a book about Haiti, but then she came back and dedicated herself to this organization in Washington, D.C. that just trained, generations of scholars and students and musicians, and did a lot of performances. But also her sister. So her sister, Ida, was also born in British Columbia, but then grew up in the U.S. and went to Oberlin. So Ida ends up marrying, as I said, Mr. Gibbs became a diplomat in Madagascar, and he had a young lawyer who was kind of his assistant. And that young lawyer was named William Hunt. He'd actually been born enslaved. He'd actually been a jockey in his youth, which was really not uncommon.
Wow.
Black people were in charge of caring for horses and training horses. So there's a long history of Black equestrians, Black jockeys, Black trainers. In fact, not to digress, but the first, as one other author has put it, that our first professional athlete in this country was Austin Curtis, who was an enslaved Black jockey in Virginia when the sport was, it was like before the Kentucky Derby. It's the sport was like, they just like run a lap or something. I don't know. It's like some British thing, where they like, everybody would come out, whatever race, whatever class would come out to watch. This was the entertainment. This was the professional sporting event. And so Austin Curtis, during the American Revolution, managed to hide a bunch of horses from General Cornwallis. I don't know how that happened, but anyway, he was awarded his freedom as a result of that meritorious service during the American Revolution, and he ended up just having his own sort of stable and his own, racing career after that. So this history of Black jockeys is deep, and then, as you guys probably know, all the first Kentucky Derby winners were also people who were formerly enslaved, and the trainers and stuff. So it's interesting. So this guy, William Hunt, who went on to become a lawyer, he had been a jockey in his youth. There's a big long history there. So anyway, William
I
Hunt,
like how the professor was like, I'm sure you know.
I mean, and that's the thing is, I feel like we should. That's why I keep doing this on Twitter. Like, we should know this.
Yeah.
Such great history. Why isn't it all over Netflix? Why don't we? Anyway, but so William Hunt and Ida get married, and he basically becomes a diplomat in his own right, and she becomes sort of a diplomat in her own right, if you know what I mean. She's traveling with him all around the world. She's giving talks about gender equality, about racial equality. She's working with W.B. Du Bois and all of his Pan-African meetings, in London and Paris and all that stuff. So she was, quite an accomplished, and I think of her as a public servant, as well. Like, even though she wasn't officially a diplomat, she was giving, she was participating in these discussions in these sort of international political spheres. So that's just some of the Gibbs family, but what a remarkable family.
Oh my goodness. And as I'm reading about Charlotta, I'm seeing that in 1920, she was the co-president of the Los Angeles chapter of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, founded by Marcus Garvey. It's complicated. Seena and I were talking at the top of the show. Christina Proenza-Coles is here, author of American Founders, How People of African Descent Established Freedom in the New World. We were talking about the complicated relationship that we have to have as Americans with this country, with its history, with its foundational history, and yet still be patriotic, meaning, we may want to leave, but we're here. And so we're going to make this country into what it's supposed to be. And to hear, Martin Delaney and Charlotta and Ida's father leaving, coming back, leave, you come back. W.D. Du Bois was like, I'm here. And then he ended up in Africa. That's where he made transition in his 90s in Ghana. But it's difficult. Marcus Garvey was like, let's go back. So they were like, all right, we're going to deport you. It's a struggle, to be American, and especially to be American and be Black in America. It's a constant schizophrenic battle I won't even say to love a nation that never loved you, because I don't think love is in the equation, but to fight for something that you built and that you deserve to have a stake in. I think that's the relationship.
I mean, I think it's just really tragic that, the way I see it is that we are, I just want to say that Marcus Garvey's wives, Amy Garvey, they both spoke at these, along with Ida Hunt, at those Pan-African conferences with W.B. Du Bois. So I just had to throw that in there for a second. But I think that, the way I see it, and I do this all the time with the whole, I'm in Virginia, this Thomas Jefferson stuff and Sally Hemings, she's, in my view, she's a founding mother, right? And to me, this idea that our founding family is a mixed race family part of whom was enslaved, part of whom was free. Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson's wife, Martha Jefferson, they were sisters. And so the way I see it, we're like all from this like incredibly dysfunctional, violently dysfunctional and abusive family.